Convivial Studio created an exhibition about coral reefs and plankton for the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach. The development process led us to meet inspiring scientists, experts, and makers. This video series shows the dedicated people that are working in the field and the making of the exhibition.
My name is Dr. John Burns. I'm an assistant professor of marine science and data science at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. I've been working in Hawaii for a little over a decade. Initially, I was doing more, I'd say, conventional surveys and a lot of biology assessments. I found we had a lapse in our ability to really track how they were changing, and that's where the 3D mapping came into play, because before that, and it's still commonly done, we just take single snapshots of the reef, but it doesn't give you any sense of the shape and structure. And the shape and structure of the corals is what makes them so important. Like, that is what creates the reef. That's the home for all the fish. That's why they're such productive ecosystems. So identifying that approach and figuring out how to adapt it underwater was really helpful, so that we could actually start to understand that system better. So how does the environment change their biology? How does that impact the way they grow and the formations they make? And how do those changes affect the entire ecosystem? So if their shapes shift, how will the fish respond? How will invertebrates and algae respond? We're still using the 3D mapping techniques. We're isolating it to these small 1 by 1 meter squares right now, where we're randomly placing squares at this site. And they're going to compare from the surveys how well the diver with their own eyes assesses coral health and marks, size, diversity, community structure. And then we'll take the images, go back to the lab, build 3D models for every one of the plots. So we'll hopefully, from just this last 2 days, get somewhere in the ballpark of maybe 40 to 50 plots that we'll render into 3D models, and then analyze all of those. And we're actually trying to see if the computer or the human can do a better job. Mostly we're just trying to understand what's going on. And it sounds silly, but they're such complicated organisms for being so simple. So when you hop in, and you've seen plenty of corals, they're just these funky Dr. Seuss looking colored rocks, but they're an animal, and they have plants living inside of them. They've got really intense mutualistic relationships with bacteria, similar to our stomachs with our microbiome. So if you jump in here and then right over there, they'll be completely different, even though they look relatively similar. So the corals will grow in a different pattern, different sizes and shapes. And that's a question that's been focused on by ecologists for decades, because it's really hard to understand exactly what forces drive them growing in the community formations that they do. And even individually, they'll look so different. And beyond just how they look, what we're really interested in is their health. So why do some of those corals get much more disease than others? And it's to the level where you can have two corals of the same species side by side. One will get very severely affected by a disease and the other's totally fine. And we don't know why. So you kind of attack the issue from as many angles as you can. So some of the work is at a tiny molecular scale, trying to figure out, like, biologically what happens to a coral if there's an increase in water temperature, or it gets diseased, or the pH levels change. And then on the other side is some of the work that we're doing right now, where you're trying to map it, and get an understanding of just the spatial patterns. And in a lot of it too, we track it over time temporally. So we keep coming back to the sites, and that way, if there's, like we've had recently, a lot of coral bleaching events or storms, there were the models from this Hawaii island, which is unique in the sense it's so young. I think you had one from Waiapai too. So that spot's so young, it just got covered by lava again. Now it's all gone. That model you have is a virtual, one of the last virtual documentations of that reef. And so it started back at, now it's maybe several months old, and it'll take years for it to come back. But we have these really young emerging reefs. And then in the monument, the ones I shared from there are now on reef platforms that are in the tens of millions of years old. And it's nice to see the difference as you go along that gradient. And the Kiribati is another special place that we work, where it's just a very isolated reef in these small atoll communities, and the corals are just really impressive. Very beautiful diversity, shape and structure. Those corals from French frigate, so like that reef is so old, that's what produces the spur and groove. It gives it like those nice channels and valleys, and it takes, I mean, thousands to millions of years for the water to keep moving in and out to sort of carve out those channels. And then those big circular plating corals, those don't form anywhere else in Hawaii. I mean, they're very rare here and there, but that's what makes that site so unique. It's a bit of a mystery still. They're trying to figure out where are the coral larvae coming from that allows them to just have these fields of plating corals that you won't find anywhere else. It's pretty special. People realize how much we all depend on corals. So, I mean, those ecosystems are so productive. If you live in the middle of the U.S. or any continent, I mean, the air you breathe is still being cleaned and the oxygen is coming from coral reef environments. And the biomedical resources, the food, the economic prosperity they provide, it has a global impact. You know, they're estimated to be worth hundreds of billions of dollars globally. So it's definitely something to care about and be concerned about, because in today's changing climate, we're continually seeing these environments being threatened. And I think the worst thing that could happen is, considering we've only visually seen as humans, like we've only gone out and looked at a tiny proportion of them. I mean, imagine losing all of that wealth of resource, and we don't even know what could be discovered yet.
For the Aquarium of the Pacific exhibition, we 3D carved 5 large-scale panels using 3D scans from actual coral reefs provided by Dr. John Burns. Using projection mapping techniques, we are adding colorful textures and animations on top of the panels. Additionally, there are soft material inserts in the panels. Those are made using 3D printing and mold making, and they are providing interesting haptic feedback for the audience. Finally, there are vibrating speakers and 3D soundscapes captured from the reefs. All this combined creates an immersive experience for the audience.
But people don't understand corals, you know, because very few get to see it. So having an exhibit, I'm such a fan of when folks put in that effort to share it with people. Because otherwise, if you don't get a first-hand exposure, it's just going to be a mystery to you. And until you, I think, connect with it, you don't really kind of have that appreciation and that concern as to what the world would be like if we lost them all. When you see an aquarium, you know, people, like, you see their eyes popping, shapes and structures. It's nothing you would imagine on your own. But I love the concept of the exhibit where you're sort of left to your own to just walk and explore, and the lighting and the tones is very similar. You know, you go underwater and the lighting shifts, the sound shifts, you're very immersed, and it's captivating. And I think trying to get that sense to people that might not otherwise have the opportunity can hopefully open their mind to, you know, what's out there and how important it is.